Mitt Romney extends his lead after Super Tuesday's voting extravaganza, but he'll still have to fight on for the Republican Party's nomination. You're watching Inside Story US 2012 from Washington. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu. Mitt Romney took a huge step towards becoming the Republican Party's presidential nominee after a convincing set of results from Super Tuesday.
We're counting up the delegates for the convention, and it looks good, and we're counting down the days until November, and that looks even better.
The former private equity tycoon won in his home state Massachusetts, as well as in Idaho, Vermont, Virginia and Alaska, and he also came out on top in the crucial swing state Ohio. But close behind him in Ohio was his rival, Rick Santorum, who's also confident he still has a shot at the nomination after wins in Oklahoma, Tennessee and North Dakota. For some, it was a do-or-die moment. Newt Gingrich will feel slightly more emboldened, having won his home state of Georgia, as expected. But Ron Paul's future is unclear after a disappointing night. Most importantly for Romney, he now has a commanding lead in the all-important delegate count. But there was no knockout blow. In fact, far from settling matters, nearly all the candidates will feel they gained enough from Super Tuesday to continue their race, even though analysts argue that a long, drawn-out primary season will hurt the eventual nominee and benefit President Barack Obama. Alan Fisher has more from Boston, Massachusetts.
We were never going to get a definitive answer on who the candidate would be after Super Tuesday, but certainly the picture is a lot clearer. And what has come shining through is Mitt Romney's nationwide organisation. Take Virginia. Now, Rick Santorum and Newt Gingrich weren't organised to get on the ballot in that state. Mitt Romney won, and that is a significant victory for him. They didn't compete in Massachusetts, believing that the former governor here would win. Mitt Romney did win, and he won big, and that is going to be important when it comes to the delegate count. And then there is the battleground state of Ohio, where Mitt Romney was behind for so long going into Super Tuesday and won by a very small margin. Rick Santorum wasn't on the ballot in a number of counties in the state, and that looks as if it has cost him dearly. Now, over the next few days, the Mitt Romney campaign will be making the case that no other candidate can reach the magic number of 1,144. That's the number of delegates needed to secure the Republican Party nomination. They will also be making that same case to the people who back Rick Santorum, Newt Gingrich and Ron Paul, arguing that they're spending money on a campaign which would be better spent on a general election campaign, taking on the man they all want to beat, who is President Barack Obama. So for Mitt Romney, Super Tuesday has meant being better organised, being better funded, and now he's out in front when it comes to selecting the nominee for president for the Republican Party.
So what have we learned from Super Tuesday? With me to discuss this in the studio is Mark Blumenthal, the senior polling editor of the Huffington Post. Next to him, Chris Henick, a Republican strategist and former senior advisor to Rudy Giuliani's presidential committee. And from Atlanta, Georgia, Jason Johnson, professor of political science at Hiram University in Ohio. Gentlemen, thanks to all of you for joining us. So after Super Tuesday, multiple races, 6 won by Mitt Romney. Do we now see a clearer path to the Republican nomination, or is it still all up in the air? What have we learned, Mark?
No, I've learned, or at least I've had reinforced for me, two things. One, Mitt Romney is going to be the nominee of the Republican Party. It's just a matter of when. Two, it is going to take a while. We have at least 2-3 candidates who are going to continue to plow on, and because the process is fairly extended, it may take a few months before it's clear that he's going to clear the 1,144 delegates he needs to be the nominee.
That's the magic number, the number of delegates you need to get the nomination. Jason in Atlanta. Jason, what was your take on yesterday's events?
What I saw yesterday is that Mitt Romney has to spend a tremendous amount of money if he is going to win this presidential election. I mean, in any instance where he cannot just absolutely rain down cash and negative ads on his opponents, he loses. You know, when he was in Ohio, he won because he bombarded the airwaves against Rick Santorum. In Michigan, he bombarded the airwaves. But we saw what happened with Minnesota and Missouri. And then you saw yesterday, he didn't spend that much time in North Dakota. He spent a little bit of time in Tennessee. Any place where he's not focusing his money, his negative attacks, he loses. So he's going to end up winning this nomination, but he's going to have a harder time running against Barack Obama this fall.
Chris, we looked at Romney winning in both Michigan and Ohio. Ohio, of course, that crucial swing state. But Michigan, one expected him to have a very convincing win there because that's his home state in many ways. That's where he was born. His father was a very popular governor over there. How do you explain those very narrow margins?
Well, those margins were very similar to Michigan and Ohio, but I believe the way they explain it is it just proves once again this nomination is not going to be handed to anyone. It's going to have to be earned, even the hard way. But Mark's right on the 1144. This is really a delicate game. But let's face it, Romney has, of the count of 716 delegates that both combine bound and unbound, he's got roughly 292 bound delegates. That's 60% of what's selected already. So whatever he's doing,
right.
It's working at his advantage despite small numbers.
Okay. I just want to stop you there for a moment because for the sake of our viewers around the world, when a candidate wins delegates in each state's primary or caucus, those delegates then offer their support during the Republican convention in August. Now, you win 1,144 delegates and you've got the party's presidential nomination. Now, according to an Associated Press report, former Governor Mitt Romney leads the nomination race with 415 delegates. That's more than all of his rivals combined. Rick Santorum is second with 176 and Newt Gingrich on 105. But there's still plenty of time for them to catch up as nominating contests are still scheduled until the end of June. Chris, I just want to get back to you here. Romney may have amassed all these delegates, but did he improve his ability to connect with voters, especially conservative voters?
Well, from a standpoint, he's doing his best, but it's more probably on the lack of attributes compared to issues conservatively. But this is when authenticity comes into play. If Republican voters feel like that he's offering a real sense of leadership, pro-growth, physical plans to turn the country around. But clearly, this thing is going to go on, I know, at least on May 8th, simply because there are 9 primaries after March 24th leading into May 8th. So, and let's face it, having Newt Gingrich and Santorum along plus Paul is to his advantage right now. Having anybody leave the race, that's when you really have a one-on-one chance. And if he's not appealing to Republicans, he could lose a number of states head-to-head right now, if that was the case.
I was going to say, I think that the fundamental problem that Mitt Romney's had in the primaries connecting with conservatives isn't really so much about connecting. And it's fundamental. It's not likely to be solved between now and when he gets the majority of delegates. The problem is that Republicans have gotten to know him, and they know that he was a more moderate governor of Massachusetts, and he's taken positions on issues that many of the more conservative Republicans just don't agree with in the past. And all things being equal, there are very, very few who would say he is an unacceptable Republican nominee, but there are quite a few, 30, 40, 50%, who would really prefer somebody who would prefer a more conservative, more reliably conservative candidate. They just haven't been able to settle on one, and that's why we've seen the poll numbers bounce up and down and up and down for the last 6 to 8 months.
Okay, let's go back to Jason. Jason, when we look at this nomination process on the Republican side, we've seen that, there's a certain type of voter that votes in these nomination contests, and it happens to be the voter who might be, and in many instances is, the one who is very much on the extreme conservative side of the Republican Party. And that has the effect of pushing the candidates in that direction as well. So they look like they're radical in some respects as far as their views are concerned. And of course, when one of them gets a nomination, they're going to have to pivot and move back to the center, right?
Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. The difficulty this year is that the core, the base of the Republican Party, they don't just want to beat Barack Obama. They hate him. They want him erased from history books. They think everything he's done since he got into office is illegitimate. And they want a candidate who has that level of anger and antipathy towards Obama. And the catch is, Rick Santorum, yes, he's got that anger. He thinks Barack Obama's the worst president ever. Newt Gingrich feels that way. Mitt Romney just wants the job. He doesn't hate Barack Obama, and that's one of the reasons he's having trouble connecting. The man is intelligent, he's got a great record, he's capable. There's not anyone who can really question whether he's a legitimate Republican, but he doesn't have that passion, he doesn't have that anger, and that's why he's not connecting with voters.
Chris, is that the case? Has Rick Santorum tapped into the anger and hatred against Barack Obama?
Well, it clearly is the Obamacare and the positions that are out there. Typically, an incumbent running for re-election it's a referendum about the incumbent. The incumbent wants to make it a choice. Now, some people may argue these primaries extended is giving that opportunity to Obama to make that choice. But he is the common denominator in the Republican primaries, driving not necessarily electability or winnability as much as it is just a comparison on policies. I mean, let's face it, his job disapproval rating is right around 53% from the battleground surveys that were just out. His personal approval rating is much higher. But if you look back at the sense of the wrong track of the country that I'm sure Mark does as a pollster, he's seeing probably reflecting 59 to 60% of key voters in the fall, independent seniors, feel like this country's on the wrong track, much wrong track. So there's this contradiction that Obama's going to have to face on that front. It's kind of like he's sailing into winds that people hadn't quite detected yet.
Okay, well, let's ask Mark. Mark, that key group, the independent voters, the group that decides who becomes president, who goes to the White House, how big a role are they going to play in November?
Well, I think we want to step back for a second. There is a big group of voters, I believe it's about 40% now, who, when asked by pollsters the simple question, when it comes to politics, do you think of yourself as a Democrat or Republican, an independent or something else, will say an independent or neither. But that group includes a lot of people, I believe it's about a third to half, who voted for John McCain. Barack Obama is going to win those people. And those independents who lean Republican, political scientists are also going to tell you that they, even though they say on the first question that they're independent, they tend to lean to one party or another, and they tend to vote reliably for that party. So if you want to cherry pick numbers out of the independent group, it's not hard to do, because you can find a third to half who reliably vote Republican. There is within that group, though, a narrow sliver that are true swing voters. And we do learn something about the narrow group by looking at them. But I can come back to this, but there's a group called Third Way that put out a report in the last couple of months. And they went back to the exit polls, and they pulled out, there were 23% of independents who supported Barack Obama. They were 23% of his support, and about half of them didn't vote for John Kerry in 2004. It gets you down to about 6% of the voters from 08. Right. That's the critical group. The independents who swung to Obama in 08, many of whom didn't vote for a Democrat in 2010. And they're not so much older. They actually tend to be younger. They tend to be more female. And it's going to be Obama's ability to hold those voters in 08 that'll determine whether he wins or loses, in part.
Yeah. Okay, Jason, are we investing too much, or putting too much of an emphasis on independent voters, on this group, which...
Yeah, I've always thought that this is the political scientist in me and the political analyst in me. Independent voters are sort of the political version of Baron Munchausen syndrome. They just want everyone to pay attention to them. And you have these groups of independent voters who always magically appear around election time, and they're wringing their hands and saying, I just can't decide. Look, they know how they feel. There aren't that many true independent voters in the United States of America. Most people, as Mark said, they lean left or they lean right one way or another. Usually the decision people are trying to make is, do they want to bother to vote at all? So, I don't think the question is going to be, can Obama capture independence? I think his bigger issue is going to be, can he get the levels of turnout amongst African Americans, Latinos, and people under the age of 35 that he got in 2008? That's going to be infinitely more important to his chances of success than whether or not he can get independent voters.
Okay, Chris. Some of the views that we've been hearing from the candidates on this process and this nomination trail have been considered very extreme views, and they may have lost support among the middle ground in the country. Do you think they're going to regain that support?
Well, it's a question. Certainly, in primaries, there is a narrow demographic that you focus on, but I'm curious how your definition of extreme, as much as it is in a sense of just where they feel the rank and file of the party voters.
Let's say, for instance, Rick Santorum's views on contraception, Rick Santorum's views on going to college.
Sure. At the same time, he has targeting his demographic is working class, typically more registered Democrat than they are Republican. So he's almost targeting a declining demographic.
But that's not casting a very wide net, is it? Yeah. It's casting a very small net.
Right. At the same time, Romney is targeting more the exurbs, the higher end of suburbs, which frankly the Republicans hadn't really carried that strongly since 1988. So some people may say Romney is is in a better position on that strength alone. But I still think from a standpoint of appealing to issues, you're not going to see attributes take the stage more than issues. People really feel like, are they a leader? Can they take this country as an executive to make decisions? At the same time, can they also not kick the can down the road on issues such as the president's done on spending and on growth policies?
And this is actually one of the big issues that I've seen with Mitt Romney. You know, he's winning in traditionally Democratic areas throughout this primary process. So he's doing well in suburbs and he's doing well in cities and he's not doing well in rural areas. That's not going to be a good strategy for winning places like Ohio and winning places like Virginia come the fall. Barack Obama is not going to lose to Mitt Romney in Richmond. Barack Obama is not going to lose to Mitt Romney in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio. So Romney really still has this challenge of expanding the types and number of people who are going to be enthusiastic about voting for him. And if he can't do that, and it's actually, as the other guy said, he's not going to change people's perception of him between now and the election. He's got to hope that Barack Obama voters are completely despondent, that the economy's in bad shape, and that he can somehow, like a boxer, just hold into this fight long enough and get a knockout blow at the last minute, because he's not going to run into this election as a strong front runner.
And here's why that's very true. Whether we're looking at that narrow little slice of independents who always vote and flip back and forth between the candidates.
But sorry, just one thing, just to clear up one thing. In this process, it's registered Republicans that are mostly voting, right?
Absolutely. Well, Republicans and some independents who feel like Republicans and just aren't registered that way and are allowed to vote. Depends on the state.
Right. You know, because Jason was saying there that Mitt Romney's been winning in areas where there's a lot of Democratic support. So
he's winning among Republicans in suburban areas,
right?
And that may not, he'll have those people, and he'll have most of the Republicans who he's losing in the rural areas too. But the issue of who's going to win in November is going to be determined by, again, this narrow little slice of people that vote all the time but flip back and forth, and others who sometimes vote and sometimes don't, who voted in 2008 may not have before, and incidentally, those are often the same kinds of people. And their decision about whether they're good, one of the things that characterizes those kinds of voters is they're not as engaged in politics. They don't follow the news every day. They don't read through to A8 of the newspaper to read the political story. They're much more disengaged. And so I think the economy and its condition in some ways matters more, because it's the one yardstick they have to sort of cut through the bull and say, okay, you talk a good game, but things aren't so good. Or you talk a good game and, hey, things are turning around, it's better. And I think that's why the economy is so important for the
right, and a lot of it's, of course, going to depend on money, the amount of money the candidates spend. I just want to get back to that money point on Super Tuesday. Romney outspent Santorum 4-1 in Ohio. Didn't seem to have worked for him, did it? I mean, he won, but narrow.
I'd argue that actually, I'd go the other way. No, it didn't solve his fundamental problem. I mean, he still has big perception problems with Republicans. But in Ohio, he split right down the middle with Santorum on votes. He got 38 delegates to Santorum's 21. Part of that is because Santorum gave away 6 to 10 delegates by not having the candidates list. But Romney still got a disproportionate share, and I think that is in large part because they spent their money in a smart way.
And on the other hand, in Tennessee, which was expected to go Romney, at least do better than he did, he lost by a quite considerable margin. In doing so, lost at least 14 delegates. It's done differently in all different states, but almost discounted what he picked up in, you'd see, the Ohio effort. So where spending matters a lot, where you target it, and the question is, should there have been more spending in a couple other states where markets are more available and more or less expensive?
Yeah. One other question, Chris, and that is, how worrying is it for Republican leaders that, Tuesday, Super Tuesday, was seemingly an inconclusive day, for the Republican Party? We didn't see one leader just come out the gate there and canter all the way down to the nomination. Of course, they'd be hoping for a very convincing Romney win, because they're seeing this infighting that's taking place in the Republican Party, and many of them see it as being very destructive.
Yes, well, it's not, you know, there's certainly the hand-wringing going on that this is going on way too long, but look, this is presidential politics, primaries, and these are the candidates that chose to run, not the ones who did not in a year ago. So they all have their various sense of what they want to do as an executive and lead the country, and certainly lead the Republican Party. But it is what it is in a sense of that this is going to go on, and I quite frankly go back to the point, I think this is, Romney's advantage is for this to go on and to have the same amount of candidates, because what's working for him is acquiring all of those delegates when he's winning, but not winning majorities, but winning delegates by only finishing 1% perhaps statewide.
Okay, let's go back to Jason. Jason, what about Newt Gingrich's victory in Georgia? Now, that was expected. After all, that is his home state. I mean, it's enough to keep him in the race. But what becomes of Newt Gingrich now?
Newt Gingrich is only staying in this race out of anger. I mean, he hates Mitt Romney, and he doesn't want to see him win. But like an old football player who doesn't realize that his time has passed, you know, Gingrich is the last person to know that he's not helping himself. In fact, the longer he stays in the race, he splits the conservative vote and actually helps Mitt Romney, who's the man that he's trying to stop. So, you know, that's one of the real issues that we're seeing in this campaign. There's not a lot of good strategy going on. Many of these Republicans, you know, they don't seem to have a very good idea as to how to approach a frontrunner who's this weak. And I think the real issue here, usually a long primary isn't necessarily going to hurt the frontrunner unless you have a situation like what we see this year, where Romney has been defined as this cold, stiff, out-of-touch rich person. And that message has extended from the Republican Party to the general public. And if that stays throughout the fall, and it probably will, that's not going to be a good image for him to have going up against Barack Obama.
Okay.
I was just going to say, Jason's on to something, because if you listen to the election night speeches, particularly with Mitt Romney, you'll hear the same structure, outline, sense that he's been giving every night despite winning and losing. So to some extent there needs to be, you know, when you actually develop a message, develop a strategy, you really ought to adjust throughout the calendar that meets the message. And sometimes presidential candidates can get so locked in that it's just repetition, repetition, repetition.
Okay, let's look ahead now. There is still time for the candidates to catch up with Mitt Romney, especially for Rick Santorum. The next primaries are in southern states that boast conservative Christian voters, a group that favors Rick Santorum. Kansas votes on Saturday, while there are also votes in Alabama, Mississippi next Tuesday, and Missouri later this month. All have an overwhelming number of voters who identify themselves as evangelicals. April sees votes in popular states like New York and Pennsylvania, and the biggest prizes are in Texas and California with a combined 327 delegates. Mark, where should we be focusing our attention now?
Well, you know, if viewers around the world are confused by our process, the only people who seem to be more confused by the rules of the Republican delegate process are American political reporters who have a hard time explaining it. They're different in every state. So what's sort of ironic about this process is that the states that so far have given Mitt Romney his biggest delegate gains have been the states we've not paid any attention to. We've been all focused on, for Super Tuesday, on Ohio and Tennessee, and meanwhile, Romney picked up over 100 delegates in Massachusetts, Virginia, and Idaho alone, which received almost no attention. Now, going forward, today, the Romney campaign had a press conference, put out a release. I will grant that they are spinning their story as hard as they can, but there's some truth to this. As you go forward, there are 4 states that will award all of its delegates to the winner, and all 4 of them are states that Romney's likely to win. Utah, with more Mormons than anywhere else. New Jersey, where he's been endorsed by the governor in the Northeast. The District of Columbia, which is similar, and for the life of me, I'm forgetting the 4th. I'm pulling a Rick Perry here. But they're strong states for Romney. And he's likely, if anything, to increase his delegate lead in those states while basically breaking even with the other candidates and many of the rest.
Okay,
but
Chris, you get the last one.
You mentioned New York and Pennsylvania. That's a combined vote of 167 delegates right there. And it's proportional. So Santorum could win Pennsylvania, his home state, theoretically, but Romney could get a huge number of delegates just by virtue of the way it's set up. So I would look ahead projectingly these smaller southern states right now, but I think those 2 are going to be pretty revealing. And Indiana, Santorum didn't make it on the ballot. on May 8th. So that will be another one that Romney will pick up.
Okay, thank you. We're going to have to leave it there. Time's run out. Thanks to all of you for joining us. And that's it from the Inside Story team in Washington, D.C. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, where you can find more information about the program. And we want to hear from you. Tell us what stories you think we should be covering. You can send your ideas directly to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net.